How much money did I spend on the van build? My goal for this van build was not to break the bank. I set a budget, I set a deadline, and I didn't waste any time getting started. I purchased a 2021 Ford Transit extended high roof cargo van. The purchase price was $51,250. Less my trade-in value of $9,945 left $41,305 to be financed. Overwhelmed by the large scope of the conversion process, I tackled one simple task, and that was rust prevention. But first, I needed to clean off all the grime. I removed the heavy rubber mat and used an old rag and soapy water to wipe down the interior walls, the ceiling, and the floor. Thankfully, the van was like new and had very little rust. Once everything was dry, I applied Rust-Oleum and it was good as new again. Next up was the subfloor and the flooring. I used 2x2s, mini cell foam, XPS foam boards, and 1/2-inch plywood sheathing for the subfloor. Then, with help from a friend, we installed luxury vinyl tile. All in, the flooring materials and the rust prevention cost a total of $720. The floor is in, it's time to start the framing. I bought 1x3s and 1x6s. I had to buy some M6 and M8 bolts and riv nuts, and then I borrowed a rivet nut hand tool from a friend. The hardest part was figuring out how to mark the placement of each hole. Eventually, we devised a system. My dad cut off and sharpened a handful of M6 and M8 bolts. You screwed those into the holes where you were applying the board, and then you held the board up and banged on it to mark where the holes should go. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, mostly. Then I borrowed a Kreg jig from my friend. Where I could use the riv nuts, I did. Where I couldn't, I ended up using the Kreg jig attached the boards to one another. Between the wood, the riv nuts, the bolts, I spent about $349. For insulation, I went with 3M Thinsulate. I used 3M 90 spray adhesive to apply it to the walls and the ceiling. For the ceiling, I actually doubled up the 3M Thinsulate because I had enough room. In the walls near the fixed bed platform, I only applied the black mini cell foam. It was thinner than the 3M Thinsulate. And then in the wall cavities, especially where the wet bath is, and then in the lower and the upper areas where the wall cavities are pretty wide, I actually wedged in rock wool and then put 3M Thinsulate over top, kind of to keep the rock wool in, and it just felt like the best barrier to keep everything in place. All in, for insulation, I spent $712. I used marine grade wire throughout because it is top notch, which felt really important to me when you are working with electricity. Thankfully, my dad knows a lot about electricity. His dad was an electrician, so he was able to help me simplify the number of lines that I ran and really narrow it down to only the essentials. All in, for pre-wiring and wire in general, spent a total of $769. Your build might be more or less depending on the complexity of your electrical system and really your knowledge. I have a spreadsheet I'm going to share with you. There's a link to it down below. It has everything that I purchased for the van within reason. The majority of these are Amazon affiliate links, so I will get a cut if you purchase anything using one of those links. And then anything else that I sourced, whether that's insulation, the bunk awning window, or the Valet air conditioning unit, just so that you have everything should you want to purchase them for your own build. Or for all of the exterior items, I installed a 12-volt air condition unit from Valit because I wanted to have air condition even when I wasn't plugged into shore power. I installed an 80/20 roof rack from Unaka because it was the most affordable one I could find. Then we installed an awning bunk window from Nomadic Supply Company. It's awesome. I love it. It keeps out the rain. It's great. Then we installed the very commonly used Max Air fan, but with a remote. So all of that came to $3,780, and I would totally do it again. My build is 100% electric. I considered a hybrid of propane and electric, but I decided against it because I used to have that very setup, and I hated trying to source propane when I was in a place that I'm just not familiar with, which every time, every day of van life, you're pretty much not familiar with anything. So that sounded like a major hassle. Because of that, I needed a pretty hefty electrical system. What we put together was 580 amp hours of batteries, a 3,000 watt inverter from Victron, a Lynx distributor, a smart shunt. We installed a 60 amp DC to DC charger by Renogy. It works great. All in, I spent $3,870. That is not bad. I think the area where I saved the most money was with the batteries. We did not go with a name brand. We went with eco-worthy, and they've worked great so far. For my solar array, we mounted two 250 megawatt panels by Rich Solar on the Unaka roof rack. We added a solar charge controller, an isolator, the cable gland, the mounting brackets, and the T-nuts. All of that cost a total of $887. The next category is wood for the ceiling, walls, and the bed platform. The bed platform is pretty basic. It's 2x4s and 1/2-inch plywood. The ceiling is 1/4-inch thick cedar plank boards that are pre-conditioned, stained, and then have a clear coat of polyurethane on them. The walls are all 1/4-inch plywood, and then they have trim pieces finishing off all of the seams and the edges. All in for this category, I spent $493. For the plumbing system, I purchased water tanks from Class A Customs. My fresh tank is 33 gallons. It's mounted on the inside of the van. The gray tank is 22 gallons, and my dad did a custom welded cradle for it. It's mounted externally. Between that, all of the fittings, the lines, the SureFlow water filter, and the SureFlow water accumulator, plus a Camplux 4-gallon water heater, I spent around $1,031. I imagine it was more because those fittings are pretty darn expensive. For my wet bath, I went with a Rec Pro 36 by 24 by 5-inch pre-made shower pan. It was just easier than trying to figure out how to make one ourselves. Between that, the wood that I used to frame out the shower, the plastic sheeting, the waterproofing membrane, the FRP adhesive, and all of the joining trim or finishing pieces, I spent about $485. For the cabinetry, we used 1/2-inch maple plywood for one cabinet and 1/2-inch birch plywood for the other. We thought the 1/2-inch birch was the Baltic birch that everybody talks about, but it was not. I highly recommend you make sure, if that is what you're sourcing, that that is actually what you purchase. Then for the countertops, we used 3/4 inch maple plywood instead of butcher block. It was a massive weight and cost saving. Between handles and latches and locks and hinges, I spent a total of $457 on the cabinetry. This next category is appliances and fixtures. That includes the bar sink and the faucet, as well as the RCA dorm style fridge, the Impava 2-burner induction cooktop, and anything else that you would call an appliance or a fixture. For this category, I spent $1,460. Being a solo female traveler, being able to communicate is crucial. I also work from the road full time, and I have to be connected to the web. With that said, I can use my phone as a hotspot. My second tier of communication is my Starlink Gen 3 that is permanently mounted on the roof on the passenger side, and I used a trio mount magnetic mount to make that super easy. It's permanently mounted. I never have to take it down. Makes it so easy. Then there is a mount for the router back in the garage space that I purchased off of Etsy, super affordable. And then I discovered that the Gen 3 uses a lot of power, so I bought a 12-volt converter. That way I could wire it into the 12-volt fuse panel and make it much more efficient. All in for communication, I spent $1,441. Quite the investment, but well worth it. I feel so much safer, and if there's ever an emergency, whether it's myself or somebody else, I feel like we will be connected. Before we hit the road, I replaced my tires. I bought some Michelin Agilis Cross Climate DT all-terrain tires. Those cost $1,107. I had to get a second key fob and then get that programmed by the Ford dealership. That was $277. And then, of course, I needed an oil change, an inspection, and alignment. That was $310. So my maintenance / upgrades were $1,694. Let's talk finishing touches. I needed bedding, cushions, insulated window covers, screen doors, those organizers and like everything to make it actually livable. For this category, I spent a total of $1,104. Every build needs a miscellaneous catch-all bucket because there is absolutely no way that you're going to be able to track every single purchase. At least I couldn't. I was too focused on doing the build itself. So I have a catch-all of paint, fastener, tools, and other bits and bobs that came to a total of $2,109. My van build took 8.5 months to complete, and I ended up spending a grand total all in $21,359. That was about $6,000 more than what I was planning, but I have everything that I could ever need on the road, and I am super happy with how it all turned out. Welcome to my new home on wheels. She is finally done, and I am so happy with the end result. Here's a quick tour of all that we accomplished over the past 8.5 months.